If you have a cruise booked for August 2026 or later, there's something you need to know before you show up at the cruise terminal. A major change is being proposed that could affect the travel documents required for certain cruise passengers entering the United States by sea. And the confusing part? Some passengers may be perfectly fine with the documents they have today, while others could potentially need a passport depending on the final rules, their nationality, and their itinerary. But there's another problem. Even when the government allows certain documents, your cruise line can have stricter requirements. That means having a legally acceptable document doesn't always guarantee that the cruise line will let you board. So in this video, we're going to break down what's actually changing, what has not changed yet, who could be affected, and the biggest mistakes that could leave you standing at the cruise terminal while your ship sails away without you. And stay until the end, because I'll give you a simple pre-cruise document checklist that you can use before your next sailing. Let's get started. First, let's clear up one very important point. You may have seen headlines or social media posts suggesting that a brand new passport requirement automatically began on August 1, 2026. That's not quite accurate. As of now, the U.S. government has a proposed rule that could change passport requirements for certain cruise passengers traveling in the Western Hemisphere. The proposal would potentially require passports for many passengers who currently have the ability to use alternative documents on certain cruises. But this is a proposal. It should not be presented as though every cruise passenger suddenly became subject to a new passport law on August 1st. That distinction matters. Because if you're planning a cruise right now, you need to know the difference between a proposed regulation and actual final regulation, a cruise line's own policy, and the entry requirements of the countries you're visiting. These are four different things. And confusing them could cost you your cruise. Let's start with one of the most important terms you'll hear when talking about cruise documents. Closed-loop cruise. A closed-loop cruise is generally a cruise that starts and ends at the same U.S. port. For example, imagine you leave Miami, visit the Caribbean, and then return to Miami. Under current U.S. Customs and Border Protection guidance, U.S. citizens on qualifying closed-loop cruises can generally return to the United States using proof of citizenship, such as a birth certificate together with government-issued photo identification. A passport can also be used. This is one reason some American cruisers have historically taken Caribbean cruises without having a passport. But there's a catch. The fact that U.S. rules may allow alternative documents doesn't mean every country on your itinerary will accept them. And it doesn't necessarily mean your cruise line will accept them either. That's where things get complicated. Now let's talk about the change that has people paying attention. The federal government's regulatory agenda includes a proposed rule concerning passport requirements for certain passengers on cruises in the Western Hemisphere. The proposal would potentially require passports for most cruise passengers, including people traveling on cruises that currently fall under exceptions to standard passport requirements. If finalized in its proposed form, this could be a major change for some cruise travelers, especially people taking short Caribbean or Bahamas cruises who currently rely on a birth certificate and photo ID instead of a passport. But again, this is the key point. The proposal itself is not the same thing as a final rule already being enforced. So don't cancel your cruise just because you saw a social media headline saying, "No passport, no cruise after August 1st." That's too simplistic. Instead, check the rules that actually apply to your sailing. Here's where things get really important. A cruise line can require documentation that is stricter than the minimum requirements you might find for re-entering the United States. Imagine you're a U.S. citizen taking a cruise from Miami. You check the U.S. government rules and discover that your closed-loop cruise may allow a birth certificate and government-issued photo ID. You might think, "I'm good to go." But your cruise line could have its own documentation requirements. And if the cruise line says you need a passport for that particular itinerary, you could be denied boarding. That's because the cruise line is responsible for making sure passengers have the documents needed for the voyage and for the countries involved. So the lesson is simple. Don't ask only, "Can I enter the United States without a passport?" Ask, "Can I board this cruise, with this itinerary, using these documents?" Those are not necessarily the same question. Now let's talk about one of the easiest mistakes to make. Your passport might still be technically valid, but that doesn't automatically mean you can travel with it. Many countries require passports to have additional validity beyond the date of travel. Some destinations use a 6-month validity requirement. And cruise lines may also apply their own requirements depending on the itinerary. The U.S. State Department currently advises travelers to check passport validity carefully and notes that some destinations require 6 months of validity beyond the travel dates. So if your passport expires a few weeks or a couple of months after your cruise, don't assume you're safe. Check the requirements for every country you're visiting. And remember, passport validity can be based on different dates depending on the destination. Sometimes it's calculated from entry. Sometimes from departure. Sometimes from the end of the trip. And that's why simply looking at the expiration date isn't enough. Here's another example of why passport rules can become surprisingly complicated. British passport holders traveling to Schengen countries need to pay attention to the passport's actual issue date and validity rules. A passport can appear to have plenty of time remaining based on its printed expiration date, but certain older UK passports that had extra validity added during renewal can create problems for travel to the Schengen area. There have already been recent reports of cruise passengers being denied boarding because their UK passport was considered too old for the itinerary, despite the printed expiration date appearing acceptable. This is an important lesson for every cruiser. Never judge travel eligibility only by looking at the expiration date printed on your passport. Your nationality, passport history, destination, and itinerary can all matter. Now let's move beyond passports. A passport alone may not be enough. Depending on your nationality and the countries included in your itinerary, you may also need visas, electronic travel authorizations, or other entry permissions. And here's the important part. The cruise ship doesn't make the immigration rules. The countries you're visiting do. For example, a passenger may be allowed to board a ship but still face restrictions when trying to enter a particular port. That's why you should check the entry requirements for every country on your itinerary. Not just the country where the ship departs. Not just the United States. Every country. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, you should pay even closer attention. Current CBP guidance states that non-U.S. citizens generally need a passport and the appropriate documentation based on their immigration status for cruises. So if you're traveling internationally on a cruise, your documentation requirements can be completely different from those of a U.S. citizen. Here's another surprisingly common reason travelers run into trouble. Name mismatches. Your cruise reservation, passport, visa, and other travel documents should match appropriately. If your cruise booking says one name but your passport shows another, don't wait until embarkation day to figure it out. This can happen after marriage, divorce, a legal name change, a typo during booking, or simply entering your name differently from what's printed on your passport. Before your cruise, compare your reservation with your passport. Check your first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, and nationality. If something is wrong, contact the cruise line before you arrive at the terminal. Fixing a small documentation problem weeks before departure is much easier than trying to solve it while thousands of other passengers are checking in. Parents, this part is especially important. Don't assume that because a child is traveling with you, they automatically have the same documentation status as you. Children can have different documentation requirements depending on their age, nationality, itinerary, and the type of cruise. For qualifying closed-loop cruises, certain U.S. citizen children may be able to use alternative proof of citizenship under current rules. But again, don't stop there. Check your cruise line. Check the countries you're visiting. And check the requirements for the child's specific nationality. Also remember that having a birth certificate isn't the same as having a passport. If your family has an emergency during the cruise and you need to fly home internationally, a passport book can become extremely important. The State Department specifically recommends that cruise passengers carry a passport book even when it isn't strictly required for the cruise, because emergencies can force travelers to return home by air. Imagine this. You're halfway through a Caribbean cruise. Everything is going perfectly. Then you have a serious family emergency back home. Or you need unexpected medical treatment. Or the ship changes its itinerary. Suddenly, you can't simply continue the cruise and return to the original US port. You may need to fly home from a foreign country. And that's where a passport book becomes extremely valuable. A passport card can be useful for certain land and sea travel, but it is not a replacement for a passport book when you need to fly internationally. That's why the State Department recommends cruise passengers carry a passport book even when their particular cruise doesn't require one. It's basically an emergency backup for your entire trip. This is probably the biggest lesson from all of this. Cruise rules change. Government requirements change. Individual countries change their entry requirements. And cruise lines update their policies. So if you see a TikTok, Facebook post, YouTube video, or viral headline saying, "New cruise rule starts August 1st," don't automatically believe it. Go to the source. Check the US government requirements if you're entering the United States. Check the official government website of every country you're visiting. And check your cruise line's official travel document requirements. The cruise line's website should be one of your first stops after booking. So here's the checklist I recommend before every cruise. Number 1. Check your passport expiration date. Number 2. Check whether every destination on your itinerary requires additional passport validity. Number 3. Check whether you need a visa or electronic travel authorization. Number 4. Check your cruise line's travel document requirements. Number 5. Make sure the name on your reservation matches your travel documents. Number 6. If you're traveling with children, check each child's documentation separately. Number 7. Make sure you have the original documents required by the cruise line. Don't assume a photograph on your phone will be accepted. Number 8. Keep digital backup copies of your passport and important travel documents. And number 9. If you're taking a cruise that starts and ends in the same US port, don't automatically assume that means you don't need a passport. Verify it, because your itinerary and nationality matter. Now let's answer the question from the title. Does every cruise passenger suddenly need a passport after August 1st, 2026? No, that's not what the current information shows. There is a proposed federal rule that could significantly expand passport requirements for certain cruise passengers. But a proposed rule should not be confused with a final rule that is already in effect. Current CBP guidance still describes qualifying closed-loop cruises where U.S. citizens can use alternative proof of citizenship and identification. However, your cruise line may have stricter requirements, and foreign countries can impose their own entry requirements. So if you're cruising after August 1st, the safest approach isn't simply to panic. It's to verify. Check your cruise line. Check your itinerary. Check your nationality. Check your passport. And check the official entry requirements for every country you're visiting. If you already have a valid passport book with sufficient validity, that can simplify things considerably. So there you have it. The biggest mistake you can make before your next cruise isn't forgetting your swimsuit. It's arriving at the terminal without the documents you actually need. And with proposed changes potentially affecting cruise passport requirements, this is one area every cruiser should keep an eye on. Remember, the rules can depend on your nationality, itinerary, cruise line, and destination. So don't rely on a headline. Don't rely on an old cruise video. And definitely don't wait until embarkation day. Check your documents before you leave home. If this video helped you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because I'll keep bringing you the latest cruise updates, new ships, rules, and important things every cruiser should know before sailing. And now I want to hear from you. Do you always travel with a passport on cruises, even when it's not technically required? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.